His hand stopped halfway to his mouth. The spoon was still in it. The stew was still on the spoon, dark, aromatic, with the particular depth of color that comes from a roux made correctly, from a patience with heat that most people in the Montana high country had never been taught and had no reason to learn. The smell of it had filled the entire kitchen the moment she lifted the lid, and it had done something to the room that Nora could not have prevented, even if she had tried, which she had not, because she had not expected him to be there. She had thought he was in the north pasture. She had thought she had until supper. She had been making this dish the way she always made it, without thinking, without permission, her hands finding their way through a memory so old and deep it lived below thought entirely. And he had come in at the wrong hour and lifted the lid before she could say a word. And now he was standing at her stove with a spoon in his hand, and she said the only thing she could think to say, "Don't eat it." He turned and looked at her. Then he looked at the spoon. Then he put it in his mouth. He did not move for a long time. If something in you just went still, stay with me. Subscribe to this channel right now and hit the notification bell so you never miss what comes next. Drop the name of your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels tonight. Because what Jesse Kane tastes in that spoon and what it costs Nora Pruitt to let him taste it is the beginning of the most honest thing either of them will do in a long time. She had not meant to stay in Montana. She had come north from New Orleans in the spring of 1883. A cook's position at a logging camp in the Bitterroot Valley, 6 months' work, good wages, and then she would decide what came next. She was 38 years old and had been deciding what came next for 3 years, ever since her husband Remy had died of a bad heart and left her with a boarding house his family contested and a city that rearranged itself around his absence in ways she could not navigate. She was a large woman, full through the hip and shoulder, with the comfortable substantiality of a woman who had never once considered diminishing herself for a room's convenience. She had deep brown skin and black hair pinned back with the efficiency of someone who did not have time for ornament, and hands that carried 30 years of a kitchen tradition so specific it functioned less like a skill and more like a language. She had learned it at her grandmother's side on Magazine Street, a kitchen that smelled of bay laurel and filet powder and a roux that had been cooking 45 minutes, that produced food which lived only in the hands of the women who carried it and could not be found in any cookbook. She had been, in the Montana high country, the only person alive who spoke it. She had not understood it was rare until she left the city where everyone else did too. The logging camp closed in October. She found a room in Bitterroot Crossing and spent 2 weeks assessing her options, which were limited by the fact that she was a black woman of middle years in a territory with strong opinions about both, and that the available work ran to laundry and mending. It was the woman at the postal office, a compact, observant person named Dory, who had made it her business to know everyone's circumstances as a public service, who told her about Jesse Kane. Rancher north of the creek, Dory said, sorting mail without slowing. Widower. 1 daughter, Rosie, she's 8. His wife passed 2 years ago. He's been feeding those 2 on salt beef and cornmeal since spring. She handed Nora her single letter. He put an inquiry in at the county office. Cook and housekeeper. Hasn't been filled because word is he's particular. Quiet particular. Not mean, just still. "I'm all right with still," Nora said. She wrote that afternoon and described her qualifications without embellishment. She did not describe herself. She had learned that describing herself in advance gave people the opportunity to form conclusions the meeting then had to overcome. He wrote back in 4 days. 11 words. "Position still open. Come Monday if you want it. J. Kane." She came Monday. The ranch sat on a wide bench above the creek with the mountains at its back and the valley floor below. And the November sky above it was the particular pewter gray of a sky that has decided on snow and is taking its time about it. The house was large and well built and profoundly unwelcoming, in the way that houses go unwelcoming when the person who made them welcoming is gone, not neglected, not dirty, but emptied of the quality that makes a structure into a place where a person wants to be. Jesse Kane met her at the wagon. He was a tall man, lean in the manner of a man who worked too hard and ate too little, with a dark beard untrimmed at the edges and the particular quietness about him that Dory had warned her was not hostility. He looked at her the way he appeared to look at most things, steadily, completely, without social performance. "Nora Pruitt," she said. "Jesse Kane." He looked at her trunk. "One?" "One," she said. He carried it inside. She followed. In the kitchen doorway, pressed against the wall with the focused attention of a child trying to be invisible, was a girl of 8 with her father's dark eyes and a braid that had not been redone in several days. She looked at Nora with an expression that was trying to be neutral and was not succeeding because children that age cannot sustain neutrality in the presence of something they badly want. "Rosie," Jesse said, without looking at her. "This is Mrs. Pruitt." "Hello, Rosie," Nora said. Rosie looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, "Can you make something other than salt beef?" "Rosie," Jesse said. "Yes," Nora said. "Considerably other." Rosie looked at her father with the expression of a child who has just received a piece of information she intends to use. Jesse looked at Nora with the expression of a man who understood that the balance of domestic power had just shifted and was not entirely sure how he felt about it. He showed her the kitchen, which was adequate in equipment and depleted in larder, and the pantry, and the root cellar, and the sleeping room off the kitchen that would be hers. He explained that he was in the north pasture most mornings until midday, and the south pasture most afternoons, and he ate supper at 6, and was not particular about what it was, as long as it was sufficient. "Rosie rides to the schoolhouse in Bitterroot Crossing on Mondays and Wednesdays," he said. "She comes home by 3. "I'll have something for her when she gets in," Nora said. He nodded. He went to the door. He stopped, the way she would come to know he sometimes stopped, and said something he had apparently decided needed to be said. She liked her mother's cooking. "Whatever you make, it doesn't need to be the same." "It won't be," Nora said. He went out. She had the kitchen in order by the end of the first day. She had bread rising by the second morning and a proper supper on the table by 6 the second evening. And when Jessie came in from the south pasture and sat down and ate what she had made, roast prairie hen with dried herbs and a skillet cornbread that had a crust on the bottom the way good cornbread should. He ate it with the focused, appreciative silence of a man who has been a long time without proper food and is reacquainting himself with the experience. He said nothing about the meal. She had not expected him to. Rosie said, "This is the best thing I've eaten since Mama died." She said it with the flat, factual delivery of a child reporting observed data. And then she looked at her plate and continued eating. Jesse looked at his daughter, then at his plate. He said nothing, but the line of his shoulders changed. A nearly imperceptible loosening, the release of something held too long. And Nora, who had been watching from the stove, saw it and looked away before he could see that she had. In the days that followed, the shape of the household arranged itself. Rosie stood in the kitchen doorway each afternoon and watched Nora work with the absorption of a child learning something without meaning to. By the end of the second week, she was being given things to do. Stir this, hold this, watch what happens when the heat changes. She was quick and her hands were steady, and Nora found herself explaining things she had never spoken aloud before, reaching for words to describe what her grandmother had only ever demonstrated. Jessie came in early from the north pasture on the 14th day. A loose fence post, wire from the barn adjacent to the kitchen window, which was open because the stove had made the room hot. The smell came out of that window and crossed the yard and reached him before he reached the barn. He stopped. Then he went directly to the kitchen door. She heard him come in. She was at the critical point. The roux had been cooking 38 minutes and needed another 5. And a proper roux can go from deep mahogany to ruined in the space of a distracted second. And she kept her back to him, thinking it was Rosie. She heard him lift the lid. She turned. He was standing at the stove with the lid in his hand and the steam rising into his face, and the smell of it in the closed kitchen was dense and complex and entirely wrong for Montana in November. It was the smell of the Gulf, of a city built on water, of a tradition that had no business being this far north. "Don't eat it," she said. He had already picked up the spoon. He looked at her. Then he put it in his mouth. He did not move. She had grown up watching people taste this food for the first time. The moment when the flavor registered and the brain tried to categorize something it had no category for and simply stopped. She had seen it hundreds of times. He set the spoon down on the stove edge very carefully. He turned and looked at her with an expression she had not seen on his face before. Not confusion. Something larger and less comfortable. The expression of a man who has just encountered something he did not know existed. "What is that?" he said. "My grandmother's recipe," she said. "I should not have made it. It will be different tomorrow." "No," he said. "Make it exactly like that." He put the lid back with the care of a man handling something valuable. Then he went out to get his wire. She stood in the kitchen for a long moment. The roux did not burn. She watched it for the full 5 minutes, and then she added the stock and the trinity and the filet. And by supper, the kitchen was filled with something that had no business being in Montana, and was there anyway. Carried 4,000 miles in the hands of a woman who had not known, when she left New Orleans, that she was bringing it with her. It was Dory at the postal office who told her, on a Wednesday in December, about Harlan Voss. Voss was a land agent who had been circling the Kane property for 3 years. The same 3 years since Jessie's wife had died, and the general assessment had been that an isolated widower with 1 child and a grief that had made him indifferent to his own long-term interests was a man whose land could be had for the right approach at the right time. He had made 2 offers. Both declined. He had apparently been waiting for the right moment. "He's been asking around about the new arrangement at the ranch," Dory said, in the tone she used when she was delivering information she considered urgent. "Specifically about you." She paused. "There are people in this town who are happy to tell a land agent what he wants to hear about an arrangement they've already decided is improper." Nora held her letters and said nothing. "I'm not one of them," Dory said, "but I thought you should know he's been listening." What Voss had apparently been collecting was a narrative, the kind that could be presented to a county authority or simply released into the social current of a small town to do its work without official assistance. A black woman of no local family, living in a widowed rancher's house, cooking his meals and tending his child. In the mouth of a man like Voss, who needed the rancher distracted or destabilized, the ingredients were sufficient. He came to the ranch on a Thursday morning in the 3rd week of December, with a revised offer letter and the pleasant, forward-leaning manner of a man who had decided the time was right. Jessie heard him out at the kitchen table while Nora was in the root cellar taking inventory, which meant she heard the whole of it through the cellar door, which was adjacent to the kitchen floor and conducted sound with the faithfulness of a speaking tube. The offer was fair by the market. The accompanying conversation was not. Voss had the gift of implication, of circling a thing without stating it, of letting the listener arrive at the conclusion themselves, so that when the conclusion arrived, it felt like their own idea. He circled, in this fashion, the question of what people in town were saying about the arrangement. He circled the question of whether a man in Jesse's position, a widower, a father, a man of standing in the valley, had fully considered how the arrangement appeared. He used the word appearance 4 times in 12 minutes. Jesse let him finish. My arrangement with Mrs. Pruitt, Jesse said, is employment. She cooks and keeps this house. I pay her wages. A pause. I don't much care what it appears like to people who aren't in this house. Of course, Voss said pleasantly. But your daughter, my daughter, Jesse said, has eaten properly for the first time in 2 years. I'm not particular about the appearances involved in that. And Voss shifted approach. The offer, he said. The terms were generous. A man in Jesse's position. My position is fine, Jesse said. I'd like you to leave. So Voss left. He did not leave the territory, and he did not leave the conversation he had been building around town, which was already in circulation and which Nora knew she could not stop. She came up from the root cellar when the wagon sounds had faded and found Jesse at the table with his coffee, and she set her inventory list on the counter and did not say anything, because she did not know yet what there was to say. He looked at the list on the counter. You heard, he said. The door doesn't fit the frame well, she said. No, he said. He looked at his coffee. The fire in the stove spoke. Somewhere outside, the December wind moved through the gap between the barn and the house. I want you to know that, what he said, the appearance of things, you don't have to. I want to, he said. He looked up at her. You came here and you made this house into a place worth being in. Rosie talks now. Did you notice that? She didn't used to talk. After her mother, she went quiet for months, and now she talks from the moment she gets home until I make her go to bed. But he paused. He was a man who chose words the way he chose tools. For the specific job, no excess. Whatever it looks like to Harlan Voss, he said, is Harlan Voss's problem. She looked at him across the kitchen, at the firelight on his face and the coffee in his hands and the particular stillness of a man who had said the thing he meant to say and was now waiting to see what happened next. Thank you, she said. It was not everything, but it was what could be said that evening. And it was true, and she held it. Voss made his move in January, as Dory had suspected he would. He brought his narrative to the county land office in Bitterroot Crossing on a Tuesday, framed as a concern about the welfare of a minor child in an irregular domestic situation. And the county assessor, a man named Pruitt, who had the cautious, institutional temperament of someone who preferred not to be on the wrong side of anything, had sent a letter to Jesse requesting a meeting. The meeting was set for a Friday afternoon at the Bitterroot Crossing Community Hall, which was the largest indoor space in town, and which held, on that Friday, more people than had gathered there since the previous winter's town meeting. Word had moved the way it moved in that valley, quickly, thoroughly, and in advance of the official facts. And what people had come to see was not a land dispute. They had come to see what Jesse Kane would say. He arrived with Rosie and with Nora, which was the first decision. He had asked Nora to come, and she had come without asking why, because she understood that the meeting was about her, and that the question of whether she would be present for it was a question about whether she was a person in this situation or a piece of furniture being discussed. The assessor opened the meeting. Voss presented his concern with the fluency of a man who had rehearsed it. He was careful. He named nothing illegal, implicated nothing criminal, simply arranged the facts he had collected into a configuration that invited the room to draw its own conclusion. The room was drawing it. Nora could feel it, that collective readjustment, that social weather moving through the air the way actual weather moved, the temperature dropping in a way that had nothing to do with the January cold. She kept her face, as she had learned to keep it, still water. Whatever moved beneath was hers alone. The assessor turned to Jesse. "Mr. Kane, do you wish to respond?" Jesse stood. He was not a man who stood to speak. He had not stood up from his chair for the first 10 minutes of the meeting. He stood now the way he did everything, without announcement. He looked at Voss, then he looked at the room. "This is Nora Pruitt," he said. "She came to my house in November, and she has worked every day since. She has fed my daughter real meals for the first time in 2 years. She has kept my house with more competence than it has seen since my wife was alive." He paused. "She has also made something with a roux that I have not been able to stop thinking about since the first time I tasted it, which I recognize is not relevant to the county's concerns, but which I mention because it is the most honest thing I know about what she brings to a room." The room did not know what to do with this. There was a silence of approximately 10 seconds. Not the hostile silence of before, but the surprised silence of a room that received something other than what it expected. Rosie, who had been sitting beside Nora with her hands in her lap and her shoulders at her ears, made a sound that was either a laugh or a sob, and was probably both. "What I intend," Jesse said in the same plain, carrying tone, "is to ask Mrs. Pruitt to marry me, which I was planning to do privately, but which Mr. Voss has apparently arranged to happen here instead. I don't have a strong objection to that." He looked at Nora then, fully, the way he had looked at the spoon in November, the way a man looks at something he has decided and is finished being indirect about. "She may have an objection to the venue." The room had gone completely still. Nora looked at him. She looked at the room, at the faces turning toward her, at Dory near the door who had both hands pressed to her mouth, at Rosie beside her, who had reached out and taken hold of Nora's coat sleeve with both fists in the manner of a child who has decided something is not leaving and intends to assist that outcome physically if necessary. She looked at Jesse. "I don't object to the venue," she said. The room exhaled. Voss gathered his papers and left without speaking to anyone, which was the right decision and was not stopped, which was also the right decision. The assessor closed his ledger with the manner of a man who had recorded nothing because nothing recordable had occurred, which was correct. Dory appeared at Nora's elbow before they had reached the door. "I knew it," she said. "I knew it the moment you asked about the posting." "You knew nothing," Nora said. "You speculated." "I speculated correctly," Dory said. "I want to be at the wedding." "You will be at the wedding," Nora said. They were married in February in the Bitterroot Crossing Church on a Saturday, cold and clear and bright in the way Montana winter days are occasionally bright, as though the sky has briefly remembered what it is supposed to be. Dory was there. Half the valley was there, including several people who had been at the community hall meeting and had made the straightforward adjustment from audience to guest. Rosie stood beside Nora for the ceremony, not discussed in advance, simply arranged by positioning herself there when everyone took their places. She was wearing her best dress and holding a small bunch of dried bitterroot flowers she had collected from the ranch in the fall and saved for an occasion she had apparently already decided was coming, which said something about Rosie and something about what children understand that adults are still working out. Spring came late, as it does in the Bitterroot Valley, and came all at once, the snow retreating in a week. The south slope going from white to mud to green in a sequence so rapid it seemed impatient. The smell of the kitchen in the evenings that spring was the smell of that valley, and underneath it, the smell of somewhere else entirely. A tradition carried north in a woman's hands and set down in Montana soil and given, for the first time, permanent roots. Jessie came in one evening in May and stood in the kitchen doorway and watched Nora at the stove. The careful, total focus of someone listening through their hands. A low melody she was humming that belonged to a world he had only tasted once from a spoon. Rosie appeared from the back of the house and climbed onto her stool and picked up the wooden spoon she had been given, jurisdiction over in October. Nora looked at her, then at Jessie in the doorway. "You're early," she said. "I know," he said. He came in and sat at the table, and the spring evening settled around them, the creek audible through the open window, the last light on the ridge. The kitchen warm and full of a smell that had traveled 4,000 miles and arrived, finally, somewhere it intended to stay. She had been told, in the way the world tells women like her, large, black, widowed, far from everything familiar, that she was too much to accommodate and too little to credit, that her skills were acceptable until they revealed the full depth of what she knew. She had learned not to show the full depth unless she was certain of the room. She had been uncertain of this room. She had shown it anyway, by accident, over a roux on a November morning, and the room had not flinched. It had asked for more. She had always been more than enough. She had simply needed a kitchen willing to hold everything she brought to it, and the hands to receive what she made, and a man who had tasted one bite of who she was and gone still with the recognition of it. She made the roux the way it was supposed to be made, with both hands, her whole self in it, taking up every inch of the life she had come 4,000 miles to find.